In the wake of the succession of battlefield and football field, the classroom, and life on the Memorial Day, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Dennis Mann. Dennis?
Good afternoon to all. Hope you can hear me. Thanks, Colonel Gertz, for the over-the-top introduction. I hope I can live up to the remarks. When I was asked a few weeks ago by James Namnu to be the speaker at this event, I said yes, because I really admire and respect my former student from Sheehan High School. But speaking formally at occasions like this is not my forte. Over the past few weeks, I began to formulate my thoughts about this sacred day. And then in yesterday's New Haven Register, my wife pointed out that a short account of this service included me speaking about the siege of Khe Sanh. Fair play to whomever wrote that blurb for the paper, but Khe Sanh is not going to be the focus of my remarks today. Suffice to say that it was 50 years ago that the 26th Marines, all 12 infantry companies, and their supporting units were finally out of Khe Sanh for good. I was one of them. Memorial Day. I think I can give you the spirit and the purpose of the day if you will allow me to relate a story that involves three people, covers a time span of decades, and by necessity, the story will have to double back on itself from time to time. Corporal Michael J. Hiller from Phoenix, Arizona, was the first person I ever knew who died in Vietnam, and yet I had never met him. I had only heard stories about him from Ralph Blake, my college roommate at the University of Notre Dame for 2 years. Mike and Ralph had been friends in Phoenix since grammar school, and in high school, Ralph was a quarterback, and Mike was a center. On the baseball team, Ralph was a pitcher, and Mike was a catcher. They were friends, buddies, classmates, and teammates. Mike went to community college for a year and then decided to enlist in the Marines. Family and friends, including my buddy Ralph, were stunned and surprised. He wasn't drafted. It was a choice he made. And by the time Ralph and I were sophomores in South Bend, Mike was going through boot camp in San Diego and then advanced infantry training. He deployed to Vietnam in late June or early July of '66, just after Ralph and I were finishing our sophomore year at Notre Dame. Unfortunately for me, my poor grades caught up with me, as they often do, and a one-page letter that summer from admissions to my parents precluded any chance I had of returning to Notre Dame for my junior year. That fall, I voluntarily signed up for a 3-year enlistment with the Marines. I left for boot camp in early '67, around the time that Mike Hiller was about halfway through his 13-month tour in Vietnam. For me, it was Parris Island, infantry training at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and Naval Gunfire School on Coronado Island in San Diego. I came home on leave in July. That late summer had me hiking and patrolling the hot, dusty hills of Camp Pendleton, north of San Diego. 8 weeks of fine-tuning before departing for Vietnam the week after Labor Day '67. There was nothing good about that summer, except that it was essentially a Monday through Friday work week, with every weekend free. Once training secured on Friday afternoons, we did not have to report back until morning formation on Monday. For me, getting released on Fridays meant I could take the bus to San Diego and fly to Phoenix, only 360 miles away. My weekend visits with Ralph and his family were bittersweet, to say the least. They got me away from the iron hands of the Marines preparing young men for war, but they were also tinged with sadness, because as each weekend brought me closer to Labor Day, I became more cognizant of what awaited me across the Pacific. On those Friday evenings, Ralph would be at the arrival lane as I walked out of Sky Harbor Terminal, and a quick 15-minute drive would have me at his house. When you're the oldest of 12 kids like Ralph, a 13th person at the table was not that big a deal. In late August, I came out of the terminal and Ralph wasn't there to pick me up. Instead, 2 of his high school-age sisters were, and they told me that Ralph had asked them to take his place. He was at a funeral service for Mike Hiller. What made the news so crushing to me was that Mike had hiked those same hills as I currently was doing. He had attended the same classes and listened to the same lectures. Hell, he might even slept in the same barracks or filled his canteens from the same spigots. I am sure he made that same short round-trip flight to Phoenix like me, and now he was dead, killed just 2 weeks before he was due to come home. Even today, 50 weeks later, the events surrounding that weekend remain with me. It's one of those moments that stands out with simple clarity in an individual's life. Back then I was stunned, alarmed, and to be very honest, I was fearful. The thought that kept hammering at me all through that weekend and on into my first weeks overseas was, if it could happen to someone that I knew, it could certainly happen to me. I was lucky, however, very lucky, and I came home in October of '68 with 27 other names to go along with Mike's to remember and to grieve over. But it's this Mike, Hiller, and Ralph who I want to end my remarks with today. In June of 1980, I flew to San Diego and met Ralph for a 5-day mini vacation. He took away some time from his law practice in Phoenix, and as a teacher, I was off for the summer. Operating from his sister's apartment in San Diego, we didn't plan much. Beaches, racquetball, a Major League Baseball game, sleeping late, and eating well. I think the best moments of the trip were the quiet time spent reminiscing, trading insults, and voicing some of our thoughts and plans. One night we were on the freeway heading for a huge movie complex when the conversation got around to his 2 young sons. He told me that there had never been a doubt in his mind that his firstborn son, if he was ever lucky enough to have one, would be named Michael, and he was. There was silence between us then, as unpleasant memories and emotions began to stir. It took a few miles, but one of us, and I don't remember who, first breached the silence. Soon we were reliving that somber weekend in Phoenix 12 years earlier. It was then that Ralph told me, hang on 1 second. Come on, James. I should never have passed you. Ralph told me about his initial conversation with Mr. Hiller's father, and as I remember it, it went something like this. Hello, Ralph, this is Mr. Hiller. Hey, Mr. Hiller, how are you doing? Ralph, Mike is dead. I just received the news from the Marines, and when we get him home, we'd like you to be one of the pallbearers. As Ralph spoke, I sat silently in the car, thinking that if my fate had been different, my father may have been the one to call Ralph and to ask him the same heartbreaking favor. There was more silence, and I glanced to my left. No more story to be told. It was the first time that I'd ever genuinely seen my friend cry, other than tears of laughter. Here we were on our way to see the Blues Brothers, both of us blinking back tears from our collective loss more than a decade before. Death awaits us all. I know it. I don't deny it. But there are not many things one does in life that have death as a possible end result. Combat soldiers take a chance on forfeiting movies, baseball games, good meals, and all the rest forever. Worst of all, they forfeit family and friendships. I know what a good friend Mike Hiller must have been to Ralph, because Ralph's been that kind of good friend to me. What I'm trying to say is that Mike Hiller's loss is our loss, yours and mine, and that's what Memorial Day is about. It affords us the chance to communicate with those who have forfeited everything for us as a nation and as a people. There are tens of thousands of Mike Hillers from every state in the Union. And as I look out at all of you on this somewhat rainy afternoon, I know some of you too have suffered these same personal losses. We are gathered to mourn and to remember all. But I've introduced you to Mike Hiller from Arizona. And somehow I'm sure that if you remember him for a moment tomorrow, he'd be real pleased. He doesn't need tears or thanks, nor do his brothers and sisters who've lost their lives in the service to our country. Simple reflection and recollection are more than adequate. Tomorrow, on Memorial Day, when you roll out of bed and your feet hit the floor, say hi to my friend Mike Hiller. It'd make him smile. Peace.